take a closer look at President Trump's agenda for his Asia trip with Neysun Mahboubi. He's a research scholar at the University of Pennsylvania's Center for the Study of Contemporary China. So, Neysun, let me begin with DPRK.
Hi, Asieh.
Hello to you. And this is going to be a big topic of discussion in Beijing. Can President Xi and President Trump realistically achieve some kind of consensus when it seems they're far apart when it comes to DPRK?
Well, of course, that's going to be the big question on this upcoming trip to Asia for President Trump and his particular visit to China. It's true that in recent months, there has seemed to be some growing consensus between the Chinese and U.S. side, or at least there have been certain steps taken on the Chinese side that have been have been welcomed by the U.S. side. The UN sanctions, the shutting down of the Chinese banks doing business in North Korea. Just recently, the Chinese side also seemed to have dropped their objections to the THAAD missile defense system in South Korea. But still, there's this fundamental question of whether the solution for the North Korean problem will be a military solution, which the U.S. rhetoric sometimes suggests, or a diplomatic solution, which the Chinese side clearly prefers. And so I think that's going to be what we're looking for very closely to see at this meeting whether or not on that fundamental question there's a greater meeting of the minds between the two sides.
And let's talk about Xi's elevated status domestically on the world stage, coming into these talks really in a strengthened position. Then you've got President Trump with one domestic issue after another, number of distractions at home, dismal approval rating. What kind of impact do you think that will have on these talks between these men with very different mindsets?
Well, so starting on the second part of your question, there's no question that President Trump is leaving for this trip at a time when he's facing greater domestic challenges at home. And one would think that his team actually, in some ways, would welcome this trip as an opportunity to create some optics and visuals that might change the narrative from some of the things that we're reading about in the news every day this week. But then as far as their relationship, and I think in some ways what's more important than their individual statuses going into this meeting is just the different postures of the two countries in the region. In the prior administration, the Obama administration, there was a real attempt to think about pivoting towards Asia, creating this Trans-Pacific partnership, asserting U.S. authority and power in the region more robustly, and clearly that's something that the Trump administration backed away from literally his first day in office. And meanwhile, China is playing a more and more robust role in the region. So we're going to be seeing those dynamics playing out not only in their particular visit, their particular meeting in Beijing, but probably also in the ASEAN summit in the Philippines.
And you know, South Korea, Japan, China, they will all be watching the tone and the rhetoric. Do you think President Trump will tone down the language some? I mean, he's called Kim Jong-un little rocket man. He said the U.S. military is, quote, locked and loaded to deal with the DPRK. I mean, are these comments counterproductive?
I mean, obviously, I have no idea whether he's going to avoid saying certain things like that. I am fairly confident that his national security team is emphasizing to him that he shouldn't say things like that on this trip. But as everyone in the world who's following this story would know, it's unclear whether he will ultimately follow that advice on the trip.
And what will you be looking for, Neysun, in this 12-day, five-nation trip?
So I'll be, as a scholar of China and U.S.-China relations, I'll be particularly interested in how that meeting goes. I'll be very interested just to see the optics of the meeting. I think I've read that President Trump is unlikely to go the Great Wall, in part because it probably is a little awkward given his discussion of a wall in the United States. But I'll be interested to see where they take him, what they show him. Clearly, in Saudi Arabia and in France, they made efforts to impress President Trump with various things in those countries, and I'm sure the Chinese will try to top that. And so I just want to see how they create those optics. But more substantively, I'll be interested to see what kind of deliverables the Trump administration in particular tries to present out of this meeting. It hasn't been staffed up in the way that prior trips like this have been staffed up. Oftentimes deliverables are negotiated months in advance, and the Trump administration doesn't have the staffing in place to do that. A lot of it is going to be based on his personal charisma and relation with President Xi, so it'll be interesting to see what actually they can demonstrate as the consequence of this meeting.
All right, I think we will all be watching. Neysun Mahboubi, thank you so much.